Research that resonates.
Schweizer has not been wrong on any of his years and years of reporting on the Bidens.
Investigations that matter.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of Burisma?
I don't know. Probably not. But that's, I don't think that there's a lot of things that would have happened in my life that if my last name wasn't Biden.
The only entities, the only people that would report on this, and Peter Schweizer, who deserves a Medal of Freedom, in my view.
This is The Drilldown with Peter Schweizer.
Hello and welcome to The Drilldown with Peter Schweizer. You may, if you are not a first-time listener, recognize the fact that this is not Peter Schweizer's voice. This is Eric Eggers, the co-host of The Drilldown, where we still will relentlessly drill down on cronyism and corruption in the federal government and the halls of power in Washington, D.C. Since I'm here and Peter's not, I'm joined by a very special guest, Steve Stewart, part of our vice presidential team here at GAI, and somebody who has led research and investigation into a very important topic. We have a new report on this. We're going to break some news on this program, and we're going to break some news this week because of the research we've done into something that you probably have seen on television, Steve.
Yes. I mean, if you are listening to the radio, watching TV, you're seeing a lot of advertisements from law firms and seeking customers who may have been affected by some things at Camp Lejeune from 1955, 1985.
That's literally what the advertisements say. Here's two examples of them that you may have seen on television right now.
Attention, were you exposed to the toxic water at Camp Lejeune?
Congress has just passed the Camp Lejeune Justice Act, which makes billions of dollars available to victims of the toxic water supply. If you or your family were exposed, you may be entitled to a share of that money.
If you lived or worked at Camp Lejeune, even if you're not military and have suffered any of these serious health problems, call 1-800.
Drinking water should not cause cancer. If you or a loved one were stationed at Camp Lejeune between 1953 and 1987 and developed cancer, call now. You may be entitled to significant compensation.
So these advertisements are one of many that we're hearing all across the country, both on television screens, on social media, and as you noted, on terrestrial broadcast platforms. All these advertisements are part of something that happened 2 years ago, and this is what we've looked into for this report that we're unleashing this week at thedrilldown.com. Something called the Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxins Act, or the PACT Act. Joe Biden signed it on August 11th, 2022, and he was joined by a group of veterans from all over the spectrum of military service. You had people that had served in Iraq and Afghanistan who'd been wounded by tar pits, and Jon Stewart was somebody that championed their cause, and he got a special shout out from Joe Biden at the bill signing ceremony because he'd worked for years to help kind of move this legislation through the halls of Congress. He beat back Republicans who were attempting to thwart it, and he got a lot of attention for that, and these victims did too, but so did the victims of Camp Lejeune, who suffered from toxic water for, as you noted, a 30-year period. But the PACT Act creates a $6 billion fund to compensate up to 500,000 former Marines and family members who are exposed to this toxic water. And this is unlike anything that's ever existed before because of something called the Ferris Doctrine.
Exactly. The PACT Act, which was signed by President Joe Biden, also included the Camp Lejeune Justice Act, which was rolled into that. Mm-hmm. And at that signing ceremony, there was a gentleman named Ed Bell, who was a personal injury lawyer, which is sort of weird to see a personal injury lawyer there celebrating the signing of legislation that would benefit them. But the point being, the Camp Lejeune Justice Act was pushed through the legislature because of the Ferris Doctrine, which does not allow people who are in the military to sue the federal government for compensation for things that affected them during their service.
Yeah, and so we'll get through what it was that this lawyer from South Carolina, I mean, imagine this. You got the East Room of the White House. You got this bill signing ceremony. You got all kinds of different military veterans. You've got Joe Biden. You've got the celebrity, Jon Stewart, because he's been the champion of the working people. And you got this trial lawyer. And I'm just saying that the presence of this trial lawyer at this bill signing ceremony is the reason why you have so many advertisements on the air today. Because since that bill signing ceremony, $145 million has been spent by law firms and lead generators that are associated with these law firms. And that's more than double what has ever been spent before on any kind of mass advertising campaign for a tort. Now, people like Bloomberg, people that watch this stuff, say the $145 million may double. So this may still be the beginning of this new business model, because there's so much money up for grabs for victims and compensation because of the efforts of this lawyer, Ed Bell, and the fact that they worked in certain key provisions, which we're about to discuss, into this Camp Lejeune Justice Act. But it's so bad that Wall Street observers are calling it the Wild West of advertising, because you've even got private equity and hedge funds that are loaning money to law firms to spend even more money on advertising as an investment. They expect to see a recoup on investment, and that's because of how easy it may now be to get a settlement from the federal government.
Exactly, and it's interesting to watch the advertising, because it's almost like investors are looking to see, what's going to happen with a business. Well, this business is they're looking to get a law passed, and when they get the law passed, all the money goes in, because they know now that the coffers of the federal government are going to be open, and there a lot of money can be made by personal injury lawyers.
And the money has led to some aggressive tactics. One of the findings from our report, which again will be available this week at thedrilldown.com, is that you've got some people violating the U.S. Telephone Customer Protection Act. There's limits on telemarketing calls you could receive. Some people are saying that up to 15 calls from these people saying, wait, are you sure you're not an injured victim from Camp Lejeune? Even though they're on the do not call list. Like this type of thing's happening all over the country.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine when this bill passes and the coffers are open, it's like, get me leads. I got to have leads for people that were, in Camp Lejeune from this period of time. And so that goes all the way down to these people that get on the phone and just keep calling and saying, hey, you qualify. You were near North Carolina during this time. Let me sign you up.
Yeah, like, well, you drove through the area. We think you may have a case. I mean, it's so bad. I pulled one of the examples of the advertising you now see if you look for Camp Lejeune advertising. This is an advertorial that you find on a website, and we'll throw it up on the screen, but it says many folks are finding the Camp Lejeune Justice Act is hard to believe. After all, the act, number one, doesn't require proof of causation. Number two, is expected to pay six-figure averages. And number three, doesn't affect VA benefits at all. They're making it sound like it's a total windfall. If you have ever been Camp Lejeune adjacent, let's say, then you stand to make some money off of this. But that's because of the efforts of Ed Bell and his legal team. And it's not just the Marines that are standing to make money. Ed Bell and the lawyers stand to make a lot of money, and that's what we focused on in the report.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously there was the contamination at Camp Lejeune had an effect on a lot of people. And so these people waited years to get the compensation that they rightfully deserve. But the problem is it's tough to bring up the personal injury aspect of this while they're finally relieved they're going to get some justice out of this. But when you start peel back the onion, you start looking at exactly how this got started, how the law got passed, and how they stand to benefit. You've got to start asking yourself questions. Is this the best thing for the taxpayers?
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, the $6 billion does come from the taxpayers, and key provisions were put into or kept from the final version of the bill, which allows for a certain amount, maybe a hefty amount, of those tax dollars to end up in the pockets, not of the injured Marines, but of the trial lawyers themselves. And that's thanks in no small part to Ed Bell. So let's go back to before this bill was signed. You had people who for years said, hey, I think we've been exposed to this toxic water in North Carolina at this military base. What do we do? And pre-existing law said not much.
Exactly. Just imagine as an attorney, you're like, okay, we've finally got the federal government to admit that they have some liability because of what happened at Camp Lejeune. They worked to get money for studies. And all right, yes, we made a mistake. And look, we maybe even covered this up. But then you're a lawyer, a personal injury lawyer, and you find out, wait a minute, there's this thing called the Ferris Doctrine, and I can't sue the federal government because that Ferris Doctrine, which is a Supreme Court decision from the 1950s, says that if you have problems or if you're injured during your service in the military, you can't sue the federal government.
Right. You sign up to be part of the military. Being injured is kind of part of the thing you agree to. You can't then come back after the fact and sue.
So here you are, this successful lawyer at Bell. He runs into this time and time again, in around 2016, 2017, and he finally says, we've got to go to the legislature. We have to write a bill. And you get the bill done, then he has to basically go from being a lawyer in a courtroom to dealing with the legislative process.
And this is not just something that we're alleging unfoundedly. This is something that Ed Bell himself bragged about at the bill signing ceremony. He said, look, we were told by the Navy that you need to get the law changed, so we wrote the bill.
Exactly, and it was very aggressive, and it was a short period of time. He decided that they had to write a bill, so they went out and hired 25 lobbyists, started giving out campaign contributions, and they were very successful getting the issue because obviously of the emotional pull also. And so they worked the process, had some issues in the House because of attorney fees, but again, hiring the lobbyists, making campaign contributions, and then the bill was finally rolled into the PACT Act and signed.
The PACT Act was started because of part of the efforts of Jon Stewart and others. So they're able to figure out how to pair the need for these Camp Lejeune victims to be compensated with other efforts to find compensation for victims of the military. And so here we are. We have this one grand piece of legislation, which Joe Biden signed again in August of 2022. But among the lobbyists and lawyers that Ed Bell assembled, this allegedly dream team, there was one lobbyist in particular and his connections to key figures in the House and then timing of money that was spent on those lobbying efforts that we think are particularly notable, and that's what we focused on here in the report.
Yeah, so when the legislation was first introduced to the House, which was focused on Camp Lejeune, there was they wanted to get help for the victims, but there was a provision in there that limited attorney fees. Mm-hmm. In other words, look, you're not going to have to go through a jury process. You're gonna we're gonna write a bill that says yes, we owe money for compensation, but we're gonna limit the attorney fees.
Right, because allegedly, I mean, the cost should be down, right?
Exactly.
If the government's acknowledging that, hey, there's an issue here, we want to settle, so the lawyers don't have to go to court. They're not suing. We've agreed to the settlement. So now it's just going to be a matter of petitioning, proving that you have a claim, and then we're going to file this out. And as a result, then the attorneys are doing less work. So we're going to limit the amount of money they can make on behalf of the victims of the government's error.
Correct. And so that gets introduced in the House. Well, Ed Bell is very clear in that he doesn't think anybody should be messing with attorney fees. Mm-hmm. That is to be decided between the attorney and the client. He compared it to the patient-doctor privilege, and so what he did, again, was hire these lobbyists.
He's suggesting that the lawyers are like the doctor.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so no one should get in between the relationship between the lawyer and the client.
Okay.
I can charge them as, whatever I want to charge. And so the bill that was introduced into the Senate did not have fee caps, and that was the one that the Bell Legal Group and the Dream Team wanted. And so there was a difference between the House bill and the Senate bill. And so a lobbyist named Danny Weiss was hired, who had longtime ties with Nancy Pelosi and that Nancy Pelosi orbit.
He's Nancy Pelosi's former chief of staff, if I'm not
exactly.
mistaken. Okay.
And sure enough, what had happened is through the lobbying efforts, the House bill that was introduced with caps was removed, and the Senate bill was rolled into the PACT Act, and it was signed. And so the final legislation would allow attorneys basically to work out their own agreements with their clients without any kind of regulation on the fees that they might charge.
We'll talk about what we did as an organization here at the Government Accountability Institute, and we do research. We try to figure out, hey, here's a thing that's happening. Here's who's making money off of this thing that's happening. And so that's what we did. We went and we found lobbyist records. So talk about the timing of it. When was Danny Weiss hired? How much was he paid? And how did that coincide with everything that you just described?
So if you're Ed Bell and you're looking to get this legislation passed and you see, look, I got a problem in the House, you look, Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. So you find Danny Weiss, who was, like you said, the chief of staff, but beyond that, had ties to people that were really close to the Nancy Pelosi orbit. And he was the lobbyist that made the most money out of this legislation. He made well over $650,000 in lobbying fees over a 15-month period. And so the timing was the legislation was introduced in the House with caps, and then after that is when Weiss got hired. Mm-hmm. And again, they didn't need him in the Senate, so they needed him in the House.
The lawyers seem poised to not make as much money because of the fee cap provision that exists in the House version of the bill. And so they then go and hire somebody who used to work for the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi.
Exactly.
Ed Bell, it should be noted later, would brag that Nancy Pelosi was the secret sauce because of her support for this legislation, which we'll get to in a second. But they're having a problem in the House. They go and they hire this person who used to be Nancy Pelosi's chief of staff, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in expenditures later, 15 months later, the problem is resolved.
Exactly. And again, Ed Bell was not shy in this. This is not like we are having to tie these separate documents together or make assumptions. He's very clear in that, look, Nancy Pelosi, quote, was the secret sauce behind getting this done. And I think he even said that she walked this bill to the end. And that is, again, why he was at that signing ceremony.
So what does it say about the process of petitioning the government? We kind of like this American ideal. Hey, people sign up. It's an ideal victim class from a PR perspective, right? These are people who signed up to serve their country. Some people made the ultimate sacrifice. They were injured on the job as part of that effort to serve the country through no fault of their own. The United States messed up. We didn't protect their drinking water with these other veterans in Iraq and Afghanistan. We didn't ensure the safest, cleanest environment as we should have. And so those people rightfully deserve to be compensated. That's without question. And there's an argument to be made, I think, actually. I mean, here we are, the Government Accountability Institute, that these lawyers actually were the ones that helped bring about accountability to the government. So on one hand, the lawyers did the right thing because the lawyers were able to help make sure these veterans were ultimately compensated. But it's the process that we find interesting. And at the end of the day, the fact that the lawyers were able to carve out kind of unrestricted access to some of this compensation for themselves that we find to be a little troubling.
Yeah, I think that there's no doubt that people want accountability. And like you said, the compensation to the victims was long overdue. But there's a price to accountability. And I think that what you're seeing now is the battle over that price. We've already admitted there's a mistake. The compensation is going to be paid. And now the debate moves to how much is that going to be and who's going to share in the money. I mean, again, fees that go to lawyers are being rerouted from the victims. And so that's another concern. And there are some groups that have spoke about this. And when we talk about attorney fee caps.
Which groups have spoken about this?
Well, the veteran groups, they're concerned that, that people could be taken advantage of with some of the advertisement you just read, that, look, they're not going to get the money that they deserve. It's going to go to attorney fees. And when we talk about attorney fees, look, we're talking about a range of 5% to 40% to even more, and so it could be a lot of money. And so this is where I think now the debate turns. And there's still now, as we speak, proposals to put attorney fee caps back on this, but obviously it's tough to get that legislation going.
Yeah, the business models are out there, and to the point when you've got money being spent on behalf of private capital because they see this as an investment. They see specifically the law firms as an investment because of the fact that the law firms are able to, there's so many clients out there, and they're able to sign them up and they're able to make the kind of money that they can make off of these settlements, which some advertisements suggest can be in the six-figure range. And subsequent legislation does say some people want to cap it at 17% or 25%, but a lot of lawyers out there saying, look, we think it's going to be 40% contingency, right? And so that's what they think they're entitled to, maybe because they also see themselves as the doctors in this relationship. But some people think that that's not appropriate, but that's where the money was. The money was on behalf of the lawyers, not the victims, and so the lawyers stand to recoup some of that money.
Exactly. And I think, again, the margins on this, and we've talked about this previously, is you're avoiding costly jury trials on each case. So you don't have to hire consultants. The time gets cut down. So for the first time, and you see, like you said, you see these hedge funds investing, you're talking about profit margins and lawyers on these big, settlements that involve a lot of people.
Yeah, it's what to me is, I think it's troubling, but it's also fascinating from this is the way America works. Is you have Marines who are exposed to toxic water. You have other people who I think have been harmed and they're due compensation. And so everyone's like, yeah, okay, cool. Let's make sure we get them the compensation. But look who else makes money off of it. The trial lawyers, the advertising companies who make the advertising, the television and media companies who get paid to run the advertising. And now you have private equity come in and say, hey, look, we can, the more of this that's out there, the more of these there are to claim, so we want to invest in this. And it's I guess par for the course normally when you have lead generators who then discover leads and then sell them to law firms. This just speaks to how valuable these leads are for these law firms. Normally, I think, and we have this in the report, normally leads that they turn over $1,000, but now they're charging what to give them to a law firm?
I think it's up to between $5,000 and $10,000 per lead. And so that, again, it's the expectation, and you don't have to worry about appeals, or when you get a jury settlement, sometimes you got to worry about appeals cutting it down. Now, when you're dealing with the coffers of the federal government, they see this as unlimited, or at least a very high ceiling.
So a bill signing ceremony, and again, we break this all down in much further detail, and you can read the report at thedrilldown.com, and great work by Steve and our research staff here to help kind of compile this. But a bill signing ceremony in the White House that began with the host of a television show, Jon Stewart, getting special recognition from President Joe Biden has led to an influx of not a television show, but television commercials, the likes of which we've never seen before. Estimates up to $300 million will be spent on these TV commercials because they're trying to find as many victims as out there, not necessarily because they're concerned about the health and well-being of these families, but because of the amount of money it means to these law firms. And that money to the law firms is a direct result of the lobbying efforts of one lawyer in particular who was also at that bill signing ceremony. That's the story that we think no one has really seen. That's the story that has been buried underneath all these happy faces and well-compensated families, and rightfully so. But you've got legislative process, you've got lawyers cashing in, I think in some ways, on the victims of tragedy, and that's the story that we're trying to expose here at the Drill Down.
And also the future implications of what can come from this, because, again, Ed Bell's very clear, as he was about what he was trying to do with this legislation, of where this goes from now. It's a new era of mass tort litigation.
So who else stands to benefit from this?
Well, moving forward, because if you start looking at what the Ferris Doctrine did was kept people from suing the federal government. Now, all of a sudden, they have created a new path for personal injury attorneys to figure out a way to go back and look, well, what type of cases were kicked out of court due to the Ferris Doctrine? When you go back and you look at failure of equipment in the military that caused death or damage to people. You look at sexual harassment. I mean, the military over the last 20, 30 years, there's been a lot of sexual harassment cases that have come up. Now, all of a sudden, you've got these personal injury attorneys that are thinking, wait, how can I do this for a different class or a different type of settlement that was kicked out because of the Ferris Doctrine? They have found a way to get around of a court case that has really kept things in check for a number of years.
Well, there's one thing we've learned here at the Government Accountability Institute in the 12 plus years we've been in existence. If people have found a way to make money off of something, we shouldn't expect to see less of it. And so if people have found a way to make money off of getting these express lanes for lawsuits, for lack of a better term, created through legislative lobbying, then we can expect to see more of this, because the more money the lawyers make, then the more lobbyists they can hire, and you see these revolving doors, and this is just how it works, and this is why we exist. So, Steve, great job. I definitely encourage people to check out the report. We'll have some graphics and things we've created as well. You can watch our social media channels for that. We appreciate very much your time, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this on whatever podcast platform you prefer. We love to kind of bring you stories that you don't hear anywhere else, and that's what we like to do here at the Drill Down. So on behalf of Steve Stewart and Peter Schweizer, who's not here, I am Eric Eggers, and we appreciate very much your time, and we look forward to bringing you another episode of the Drill Down next week. Thanks a lot.